This is a full story. Kitten wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. My name is Rocky, and I have a daughter named Alice. One day, when our family was at the park, there was a sudden earthquake. In an effort to protect my wife, I ended up with my arm severed by a fallen streetlight. Alice was also affected, suffering a concussion and fainting. But my wife, who managed to get up from the ground, didn't even glance at me or Alice. She swiftly dialed a man's number on her phone at 180 miles per hour, speaking with a nervousness and concern I had never seen before. It turned out she had been harboring feelings for someone else all along, her first love. After hanging up the phone, without looking back, she went to find her first love, despite my futile attempts to stop her. Later, when Alice was diagnosed with leukemia, I pleaded with her to go to the hospital to see our daughter. Instead, she chose to sleep with her first love. It wasn't until after Alice passed away that I presented her with divorce papers. She begged me like a madwoman, "Please, give me another chance." I saw Haley again at the hospital. My arm was bandaged. I had medicine for Alice, and as I approached her room, I saw Haley sitting in the adjacent room, doting on a little boy named Jack. "Jack, does it still hurt?" Haley asked with concern, stroking Jack's face tenderly. I had never seen Haley so gentle. Even with Alice, she was always cold. Holding the medicine tightly, my heart felt like it was weighed down by a heavy stone. When Alice woke up, she cried out in pain and kept asking for her mom. But Haley, despite being next door, preferred to care for someone else's child rather than her own daughter's well-being. I was furious and wanted to storm in and confront her, but Alice's cries stopped me. I hurried into her room to find her weakly lying in bed, her head wrapped in bandages, her eyes filled with tears and confusion. "Daddy, why hasn't Mommy come to see me?" My heart clenched painfully. I gently wiped the tears from her eyes and couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. "Alice, sweetheart, Mommy will come soon." Alice nodded timidly, gripping the bedsheet with both hands. "Daddy, does Mommy not like me because I'm disobedient and always dirty my clothes? She likes children who are clean." My hands, frozen in the act of pouring water, trembled. If it weren't for me, perhaps Haley would have treated Alice better. My marriage to Haley was merely a connection between our families for generations. But from the moment I first saw her, I knew I was falling for her. After Haley got married, she was cold and distant towards me. Even when it came to intimate matters, it felt like she was just going through the motions. I'll never forget the undisguised disgust on her face when we were intimate. But so what? I believed that one day she would see my good qualities and accept me. After Alice was born, I thought having a child might improve our relationship. Instead, things worsened, and she directed all her frustrations at Alice. When the earthquake happened, her first thought was to call another man to express concern. Now, she's taking care of that man's son and hasn't even glanced at Alice. I couldn't answer Alice's questions. All I could do was gently stroke her cheek. Haley doesn't dislike children. She just doesn't like me. After putting Alice to bed, I couldn't help but seek out Haley. When I saw her, she was blowing on a bowl of porridge, feeding it to that child one spoonful at a time. I didn't disturb her until she noticed me. The warmth in her eyes instantly turned cold. "If you can't take care of your daughter properly, what are you doing here?" Haley's words always carried a sting, something I usually endured, but this time, I couldn't help but question her. "You know Alice is your daughter, so what are you doing now?" Before I could finish my sentence, someone entered. "Is Jack hurt?" It was a man in a bespoke suit, rushing in without even noticing me standing at the door. His body collided with my fractured arm, causing me pain. He anxiously checked Jack, relieved when he found the child unharmed. Haley's gaze stayed fixed on the man, not shifting away. "Dad, Mom protected me, so I'm not hurt." Jack tightly clung to Haley's legs. The statement left all three of us stunned. Haley quickly glanced at me, then averted her eyes as if avoiding mine, turning her head away. The atmosphere became awkward momentarily. The man finally eased the tension. "Jack, haven't I told you not to call anyone else Mom?" Haley hurriedly interjected, her proximity to the man suddenly revealing an unmistakable warmth in her eyes. "Jack is so well behaved. I've always wanted a child as obedient as him." Despite his gentlemanly behavior, I knew Haley and that man were acquainted, and their relationship ran deep. They ignored my existence. The three of them were happily together, like a family. I was filled with anger, but seeing this scene, my heart suddenly felt empty, as if everything had lost its meaning. I sighed and said nothing more, bitterly smiling as I left the hospital room. Alice was discharged 3 days later, the doctor saying there were no major issues, though my arm needed proper rest. Daddy, where's Mom? She said she'd come to take me home. My daughter looked around, searching for Haley in the crowd. Since the earthquake injury, Alice hadn't seen her mother. Alice was obedient, not making a scene because Haley had always told her she disliked noisy children. Holding Alice's hand, I waited in place, reflecting on everything that happened in the hospital. Perhaps Haley wouldn't come. Just as I was thinking that, Alice suddenly let go of my hand and ran forward with a joyful expression on her face. Mom! I snapped out of my thoughts and saw Haley awkwardly holding Alice, restoring a glimmer of hope to my once lost heart. I couldn't help but sneer. No matter how disappointed I was with Haley, everything would crumble if she appeared in front of me. I greeted Haley with a smile and tried to take her handbag, but she evaded me with a sidestep. My hand stiffened in midair and finally fell. Alice, go home with Dad first. Haley's voice was flat. I frowned. You didn't take care of Alice in the hospital, and now that she's discharged. Haley's gaze calmly settled on me, interrupting my words. Rocky, I have a lot going on. Alice has you to take care of her. She never left room for argument when she spoke. I opened my mouth, but ultimately said nothing. Your arm is injured, so you can't go to work for a few days. Stay home and take care of Alice. I have a business trip to attend. Alice's initially joyful expression instantly turned crestfallen. She reached out and grabbed Haley's sleeve. Mom, why are you leaving again? After so many years of marriage to Haley, she often used business trips as an excuse to be away from me and Alice. I sighed bitterly, suddenly feeling exhausted. My tone lost its earlier pretense and was filled with weariness. Fine, I'll take care of Alice. Haley seemed to sense my unusual demeanor. As she left, she rarely explained herself. There's an issue with a company project. This trip is necessary. I forced a smirk and firmly pried Alice's tightly clasped hand off Haley's. I stepped back with Alice, my expression calm. You do what you need to do. No need to explain to me. What are you sulking about now? Haley frowned disapprovingly at me, never one to offer much patience. The home felt no different with or without Haley. When I returned, Alice pushed my hand away and locked herself in her room. I sat on the couch, awkwardly picking up a cigarette. Haley disliked the smell of smoke, so I hadn't touched one since we got married. Thinking back, I realized how many times I had compromised myself for Haley. Tiredly leaning back, something jabbed my waist, causing a twinge of pain. It was a photo frame. As I looked at the picture inside, my carefully arranged emotions shattered once again. The photo had yellowed with age. A young Haley was nestled in another man's arms, smiling happily, a smile I had never seen. My fingertips trembled, and the man in the photo reminded me of the scene at the hospital. It was strikingly similar. I took down the photo, revealing Haley's handwriting on the back, fresh and recent. Haley loves Tony. It was such a cliched plot. Despite all my efforts, I couldn't compete with the person in her heart. Finally, I understood why Haley had been so distant with me and Alice lately. Her first love had returned. The cigarette between my fingers dropped to the floor, sparks stinging me briefly. Daddy, Alice's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. I rubbed my weary eyes and turned to see Alice standing barefoot in the doorway, holding a doll. I lifted Alice into my arms. She was quietly crying. I miss Mom. The room dimmed as tired Alice fell asleep on my shoulder. I hesitated but decided to call Haley. The phone rang for a long time before she answered, her voice impatient. I told you, I'm busy. Don't call unless it's important. I looked at the photo on the table, my voice dry. Busy with what? Being with Tony? The phone went silent suddenly. I waited patiently. Rocky, have you no shame, snooping through my things? I chuckled bitterly. Haley wouldn't explain herself to me. She just questioned me over and over. So this is why you abandoned Alice? To protect your first love, son? I practically gritted my teeth saying that. Alice shivered in her sleep on my shoulder. I don't know what you're talking about. The phone clicked off, followed by a dial tone. I picked up the intimate photo of them and studied it for a moment. Then, I lit it with a lighter. The flames licked up, consuming the photo completely, extinguishing my last hope of Haley returning to our family. In the days that followed, I didn't contact Haley again. I'm not sure if it was her guilty conscience at work, but occasionally she would send me photos of herself at the office. Yet, I never replied. When I went to pick Alice up from school, I saw her staring blankly in one direction. I called out several times, but she didn't respond. It wasn't until I followed her gaze that I understood. Despite preparing myself mentally, what I saw stabbed my eyes with pain. Haley, supposed to be away on a business trip, was there holding Jack's hand, looking affectionate. She was meticulously dressed, her face beaming as she waved towards a nearby direction. Approaching them was her first love, Tony, in his hand, a bouquet of flowers, gallantly opening the car door for Haley. Finally, I understood why Alice looked so distraught. "Dad, don't be sad." Alice's gentle voice suddenly broke the silence. I snapped out of it, realizing a tear had slipped down my cheek unnoticed. Ironically, after Haley got into Tony's car, she sent me a message. It was a photo of her at work. "I'm still on my business trip. Can you stop being so childish? Do you know how busy I am dealing with clients every day?" Rocky, did you lose your voice? My phone kept buzzing with messages. I blocked all of Haley's contacts. Then, I picked up Alice. Driving past Haley, I rolled up the window. She didn't notice me, but during the red light stop, I overheard their conversation. "Mom, when are we going to the amusement park?" Jack's voice was clear. Haley smiled warmly, seemingly comfortable with being called Mom by Jack. "Let's go tomorrow with Dad." "Okay." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. My fingertips trembled badly. "Jack has school tomorrow. Don't spoil him too much." What's wrong with spoiling my own son? Their laughter and chatter gradually faded, while the car behind me honked impatiently. I pressed the gas pedal hard, trying to mask my vulnerability, but my hands on the steering wheel still shook. Yes. If you look closely, Jack's features resemble Haley's. Maybe the child Haley is protecting is not just because of her first love, but because he's the child she had with her first love. "Dad," Alice called me softly. "Do I have a brother now?" Children understand more than we think, but they only see the surface. I remained silent for a long time. Finally, in a dry voice, I asked Alice a question. "Alice, will you only stay with Dad from now on?" Her response was a silent one. The thought of divorce only crossed my mind once. Despite being extremely disappointed with Haley, when I thought of how young Alice still was, I couldn't bear it. She adores her mother so much, and a sudden divorce would surely have a negative impact on her childhood, wouldn't it? What surprised me was that Haley came back on Alice's 5th birthday. "Rocky, are you crazy? You don't reply to my messages, and I can't reach you on the phone. Do you want to continue like this?" The moment she returned, she started berating me nonstop, completely forgetting about the trembling Alice beside her. I calmly escorted Alice back to her room and continued with my tasks, my expression unchanged. "If you want to argue, we can do it later. If you still have a conscience, you should remember today is Alice's birthday." Haley seemed surprised by my response, her face alternating between red and pale. It's true, after all, I had always listened to her. Her tone softened a bit as she placed a bag she was carrying on the sofa. Glancing at it, it looked like a children's dress. "Of course, I remember today is Alice's birthday. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come back. After all, there are still many things waiting for me to do at the company." I forcefully cut through with the knife in my hand, the sound making Haley stop mid-sentence. "This is absurd," Haley muttered, and hurried to Alice's room. But it wasn't long before the room was filled with impatient voices. "Why doesn't it fit? Mom spent a lot of money on this dress. It must be Alice who got fat." I furrowed my brows tightly, opening the door to the room. I saw Alice's face reddened and tearful because she couldn't fit into the dress, while Haley impatiently tugged at it. "Haley, that's enough." I pushed Haley to the ground directly and comforted the crying Alice. "Rocky, why did you let Alice get so fat? She's a girl, and I shouldn't have entrusted my daughter to a man like you." Haley didn't wait for my response, just shook off the dress. I asked coldly, "How long have you ignored Alice? The dress you bought can fit a 3-year-old, but Alice is already 5. If that's what you really think, you should have taken care of her properly from the beginning." Suddenly, I thought of her child with Tony, and a sarcastic smile crept onto my lips. "Well, you don't just have Alice as a child." This seemed to hit Haley hard, her face turning grim. "Rocky, it's Alice's birthday today. I don't want to argue with you." The atmosphere grew quiet, only Alice's intermittent crying filling the room. But then, the untimely doorbell rang. The person who came was Tony. "Did I disturb you?" He said he was disturbing, but there was no hint of apology in his eyes. He completely ignored me and walked straight in. Jack was trailing behind him. "Mommy!" Jack ran over joyfully and threw himself into Haley's arms. Haley looked surprised and somewhat displeased, glancing at Tony. "I thought I told you not to come." Jack insisted on seeing Mommy. I couldn't refuse him. Seeing Alice's birthday potentially disrupted by this father-son duo, I could no longer contain my anger. I slammed my fist hard against the door, startling them all. "Rocky, are you crazy?" Instinctively, Haley shielded Jack behind her. I stared directly at Tony. "Haley and I haven't divorced yet. Are you so eager to intrude as the third party?" Tony didn't hide his intentions, simply wrapping his arm around Haley's shoulder, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "Rocky, calm down. After all, Jack and Alice are siblings. It's good for them to get acquainted." I glanced towards Alice, who was not far away, and suppressed my anger. Today was Alice's birthday. I didn't want any more conflict with them. Seeing my silence, Tony sneered. "Jack never had a mother from the start. That's why he calls me mommy. Don't misunderstand." Haley suddenly approached me, took my hand, and quietly tried to explain, but I just walked into the room in silence. Strange messages came through on my phone. Each one was an intimate photo of Haley and Tony together. I looked expressionlessly towards the door and indeed saw Tony proudly waving his phone like a proclamation. A new message arrived. Attached was a paternity test between Jack and Haley. Haley had given birth to Tony's child long before marrying me. No wonder she showed no concern for her own family. And every year on Alice's birthday, Haley was never home. She was with Jack. She had long made a fool of me, certain that I would never divorce her. "Alice, do you know what you're doing? How could I have raised such a misbehaved child?" The living room echoed with scolding and crying. I rushed out of the room and found Alice covered in cake frosting. Jack was sitting on the floor, crying with his hands over his face, while Haley held him close, comforting him. Tony's face turned dark as ink, and right in front of me, he slapped Alice. "Rocky, control your daughter. She's so young and already hitting people, clearly lacks manners." My face went pale as I shielded Alice in my arms, glaring at Tony with resentment. "Daddy, Alice isn't a bad kid. It's because he said bad things about you and tried to take mommy away that Alice hit him." Alice burst into tears and buried her head in my embrace. Liar. Whenever Haley encountered issues with her son, she lost her composure, launching the most venomous verbal attacks at her own daughter. "Jack is so well behaved. How could he say such things? You never liked me from the start. I don't even know if you're really my child. Do you even have a conscience?" My voice grew cold, anger building up in my chest, unreleased. I stepped forward, grabbed Jack by his face, and slapped him hard. "Rocky!" Haley screamed, her eyes looking at me like I was a stranger. Tony saw me hit his son and immediately lunged at me. We wrestled, but he was just a pretty boy. Before long, I had him pinned. I vented my anger by stomping on Tony's face. I looked at Haley, my gaze devoid of any warmth. "There are boundaries, Haley. If you think Alice keeps me from divorcing you, you're wrong. Alice would be better off escaping from a mother who can't take responsibility." After that, I left with Alice. During this time, Haley's parents called me. Perhaps they heard about my intention to divorce and said a lot of good things. I sent the divorce agreement to Haley. Regardless of whether she was willing or not, I no longer wanted to maintain this relationship. After so many years, even stones can be heated up, let alone people. She simply never cared about me. Maybe thinking I was still sulking, Haley called me several times. When I didn't pick up, she used someone else's phone to call me. "Rocky, have you had enough of causing trouble? Once you sign, don't regret it. Alice is still so young. Do you want her to have an incomplete family?" Her words undoubtedly hit upon what worried me the most. But after what happened with Tony last time, I had already seen through everything. So, if we don't divorce, does Alice have a complete family? "Haley, I won't regret it, and I hope you won't either." I almost gritted my teeth as I said the last sentence. "Fine, this is what you said, Rocky. What ability do you have to resist me?" Haley's tone also became fierce, and in the background, I could faintly hear Jack making a commotion. See, even so, Haley still chose to accompany her first love. "Shut up," she shouted and hung up the phone the next second. I lowered my hand and slumped against the wall as if drained of energy. Alice was sleeping soundly on the hotel bed. I wasn't sure if she was sick. After leaving home, Alice developed a high fever. Even in her sleep, she kept calling out, "Mommy." A pang of pain flashed through my eyes. Haley was simply not worthy of being a mother. Perhaps my words had thoroughly angered Haley. She cut off all my financial resources. Before being with Haley, my career was actually quite decent. After graduating from college, through my own efforts, I started a small company. I earned several $100,000 a year. Not wealthy, but living a comfortable life. Haley is an ambitious woman. After marrying her, she forced me to shut down my company and find an ordinary job to take care of her daily life. life. Recently, the company downsized, and due to my injured arm, I was the first to be laid off. Without income, all financial sources at home came from Haley. Now, I'm just an unemployed wanderer. Fortunately, savings from previous years are enough to support us for a while. However, Alice's condition seems to be getting worse. Even with injections and medicine, her high fever wouldn't go away. Until one morning, Alice began to nosebleed, and I realized how serious the situation was. I almost immediately arranged for Alice to be hospitalized. But when the test results came out, I felt like the sky was falling. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Without proper treatment, the average survival period is only 3 months. However, the treatment costs a huge amount. I can't afford such a massive medical bill on my own. The child's illness cannot be delayed. She's still young, and with today's medical conditions, the survival rate is still considerable. The words of the attending physician echoed in my mind. I lit a cigarette and placed it in my mouth, my fingers hovering over Haley's phone number. I never cared about dignity. I cared even less when it came to my daughter. The phone rang for quite a while before Tony answered. "Rocky, don't you see what time it is now?" Tony's voice still carried traces of sleepiness. I gripped the phone tightly, lowering my voice. "I'm looking for Haley." Tony chuckled, almost mercilessly mocking me. "Aren't you divorcing Haley? Now that you're broke, you're crawling back? Haley's asleep. Don't call again. We're still family." The call ended, but I still held the phone up. Secondhand smoke filled my lungs, making me cough uncontrollably. Every word Tony said felt like a dagger stabbing into my heart. Alice's illness couldn't be postponed. The initial chemotherapy left her crying in pain, and I felt utterly powerless. I called Haley repeatedly, finally managing to reach her. "Changed your mind?" Her voice was flat, as if she was certain I only came back because she cut off my financial resources. "Alice is sick. I need money. The divorce can wait until Alice gets better," I pleaded. There was silence for a while on the other end of the line. Haley scoffed coldly, her tone tinged with resignation. "You won't ask me to sign the divorce agreement, but now you're finding ways to get money from me? Rocky, have you no shame? Using Alice's situation to threaten me? You're truly disgusting." Her words were venomous, showing no empathy for Alice's pain. My lips trembled slightly, gritting my teeth. "This money is important to me. Please." "So what?" Haley's ruthless words pierced my ears. "Why should I care? If you really want me to beg, then please help me." Another dismissal. I silently bowed my head, exhaustion settling in as I leaned against the hospital's glass window, sighing heavily. I stood from morning till night, smoking one cigarette after another, until the hallway was empty. Forget it. It doesn't matter anymore. Alice's condition deteriorated rapidly. I had tried every possible way, borrowing money from anyone I could think of, but it seemed Haley had already warned them, and no one lent me a cent. It was in that moment that I felt utterly useless. If my hand hadn't been injured, would I still have an income now? If I hadn't given up my career for Haley, could I have protected my daughter? These questions haunted me. "Dad, I'll be okay." Sometimes Alice would wake up, and the first thing she'd do is comfort me. If they can't cure me, then I won't let them. "Dad, I'll watch over you from heaven." She was so smart, understanding everything. Perhaps she overheard my conversations with the doctors during this time. Haley came to see me on her own initiative. I thought she finally believed what I'd been saying, but her cold words dashed all my hopes. "If you can bring Alice back and admit you were wrong, we can live like we used to." A chill spread through my limbs, and I struggled to control my trembling voice. "Alice is dying. Do you know that? You don't deserve to be a mother." "Rocky, are you done? I don't have time for your nonsense. I'm just informing you." Haley still thought I was lying to her. Alice, who had missed the best treatment window, couldn't be saved. The doctor shook his head regretfully. It was clear. Money could have saved Alice, but I didn't have the means. "Dad, I miss Mom." Those were Alice's last words. Alone, I cremated Alice and placed her in a small urn. My daughter, because of my incompetence and her mother's indifference, had left this world for good. There were still many things at home that hadn't been sorted out. Despite not wanting to see Haley, I had no choice. The door lock hadn't been changed, and as soon as I opened the door, a glass beside me exploded, its shards cutting my arm. "You decided to come back? Rocky, you're a grown man. Still throwing tantrums and leaving home?" Haley's face didn't look good. She abandoned her strong woman image in front of others. Without makeup, she looked somewhat aged. "What about Alice? Why isn't Alice back?" Haley seemed to just notice the absence of Alice's voice and tightened her grip on my hand, questioning me. me. Rocky, are you trying to threaten me with divorce using Alice? Her words were intense, giving me a headache. I forcefully pushed her hand away. Haley stumbled and fell to the ground, expressionless. I placed the urn containing Alice's ashes on the cabinet and stared at Haley. You wanted to know where Alice is, right? She's right here in this box. Upon hearing my words, Haley's face instantly turned pale. She wasn't stupid and understood immediately what I meant. Haley gritted her teeth and staggered to her feet from the ground, clutching my collar and shaking me incessantly. Is this your new trick? Give Alice back to me. Give. Her words trailed off as her pupils dilated. The death certificate of Alice lay directly in front of her, with the black and white text clear as day. Haley lost all strength, trembling and tears streaming suddenly. This can't be. You never told me, she gasped. I smirked sarcastically. Haley still refused to admit her fault. Carefully cradling Alice's urn in my arms, I didn't spare Haley a glance. I remember calling you many times, I said softly. Haley shuddered violently. But you always thought I was lying, that it was just a ploy to please you. Haley, you're the murderer. Your indifference killed Alice, who was still so young. My voice choked suddenly, and I glanced at Haley with a hatred I had never felt before. She used to be indifferent, but now that Alice was dead, all she could do was cry. Sign the divorce papers. Let's end this properly. After all these years wasted, my time with her was over. I never expected Haley to be so persistent and clinging to me. She made a scene at Alice's funeral. Rocky, can't we not divorce? Look, I haven't signed the divorce agreement yet. She had become haggard, almost unable to stop the tears from flowing upon seeing me. Suddenly, she hugged my waist, regretting with all her might. This was the first time she had humbled herself in front of me. I'm sorry. I neglected you too. But now I realize that I've always loved you. I just wasn't willing to let things end with Tony like this. That's why I acted this way. But now I see my true feelings clearly. I pried Haley's hands off me bit by bit, with a mocking smile under her somewhat desperate gaze. Do you think it's possible? You're the murderer who killed your own daughter. Haley, you really have a thick skin. Haley swayed slightly, supporting herself from falling, and I just looked at her calmly. Rocky, you're really cold-blooded. Tony's voice came from not far away. He hurried over as soon as he saw Haley, supporting the teetering Haley, but Haley pushed him away hard. Tony, we've already broken up. Hearing this, I raised an eyebrow. Looking at Tony again, I saw his gloomy face, his fists clenched. Why? Weren't you waiting for me to come back? Jack just got a mother, and now he's going to lose her again? You only lost a daughter. You still have Jack. Jack is your child. This sentence undoubtedly hit Haley's raw nerve. She slapped Tony in anger. The crisp sound of the slap echoed in the memorial hall. You can continue to make a scene. I've already called the police. I was happy to watch this farce, but this is Alice's funeral. I don't want her to be restless even in heaven. Hearing that I had called the police, Haley and Tony both shrank back. Haley still wanted to reach for my hand, but when she touched my cold gaze, she drew her hand back. Alice has just passed away. I know you're not feeling well. After a while, I'll come to you again. She looked at Alice's portrait with longing, wiped away her tears and left, but Tony didn't immediately follow, just staring at me with red eyes, as if he wanted to tear me apart. Rocky, why do you? Haley loved me first. She waited for me for so long. Just say not to love and not love? I ignored Tony's question. Aren't you living with her? Let her sign the divorce agreement quickly. From now on, I don't want to have any entanglement with Haley. However, things didn't go as I wished. Once again, I received news from Haley. It was Tony persistently calling me. His voice on the phone carried urgency mixed with deep exhaustion. Come to the hospital and see Haley. She's about to die. If she dies, what does it have to do with me? There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone, as if he wanted to explode but couldn't. She said as long as you come to see her, she will sign. I paced anxiously outside the operating room, watching the seconds tick away on my watch. Why did you call me here? Didn't you say Haley would sign? Tony looked much thinner, his slight figure making his suit look somewhat comical. He looked up in shock. I didn't expect you to be so heartless. Haley hasn't eaten or drunk for 3 days for you. Doesn't that move you at all? I glanced disdainfully at Tony, feeling he was not just pale-faced but also foolish. Alice had suffered and left this world. Even if Haley were torn to shreds, it wouldn't be enough to repay it. To get Haley's signature, I patiently waited until her surgery was over. When she regained consciousness, I rushed into the ward. When Haley saw me, there was a light in her eyes I had never seen before. before, as if seeing me gave her strength. "Rocky, I knew you couldn't let me go." I glanced around, picked up the divorce agreement on the table. Haley hadn't signed yet. I handed her the pin. She gradually slumped down, like an empty shell without a soul. "I thought, if I experienced everything you went through, you would forgive me." I just calmly replied, "After you sign, I'll leave. Whether you live or die, it's none of my concern." The love Haley spoke of was just obsession. Her character had always been like this. Only what cannot be obtained is the best, even if it's a long-lost first love. Once obtained, it's still abandoned by Haley. Seeing Tony's distraught appearance, I knew he was following in my footsteps, and Jack might be the next Alice. I had intended that if Haley refused to divorce, I would proceed with legal proceedings. But unexpectedly, she signed the divorce agreement, and she divided most of her property into my name. Not long after divorcing me, Haley married Tony. That time, Tony came to boast in front of me, inviting me to their wedding in a high-profile manner. But only I knew. Tony was already deeply trapped, unable to get out. Why? Why does she only see me as you? Haley has gone mad. Haley even forced Jack to cross-dress, raising Jack, a boy, as a daughter. Tony told me this when he found me. His once fair face had aged quite a bit after marrying Haley, unkempt with stubble, but their affairs were no longer any concern of mine. I left this city. With the property Haley had allocated to me, I funded an orphanage where the children had lost their parents, and I became a father to each and every one of them. Late at night, I still think of Alice, praying that she can forgive this weak father of hers. Story over.